Good corporate governance is vital for companies of any shape and size, but the needs and requirements of each company are very unique. The Quoted Companies Alliance has just released a best practice guide for smaller and medium-sized companies. With me is QCA CEO Tim Ward, one of the people in charge of the code. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about the code.
The code is designed specifically for small and mid-sized quoted companies. In the UK, there is a code, the UK Corporate Governance Code, which is a requirement for premium listed companies on the main market of the London Stock Exchange. This code applies to other companies, the ones on AIM, on the ISDX market, and also standard listed companies.
In this particular issue, you talk a lot about disclosure and transparency. I was wondering, how do these two particular issues vary from smaller and medium companies to larger enterprises?
We set out 12 principles for our small and mid-sized quoted companies to follow. In terms of disclosure and transparency, this gives them some guidelines to follow, some minimum disclosures, which are not as detailed as, say, the UK Corporate Governance Code. So it's a starting point, it's a minimum set of disclosures that they can step away from and slowly build up from.
And these 12 key principles that you mentioned, are they specific for small and medium-sized companies? Or are they the same as what would make good corporate governance for bigger companies, but applied differently?
The 12 principles we see as being a bedrock, so they would be good for any company to follow. What we see though is companies, growth companies in particular, don't necessarily have the resources to go into a huge amount of detail. So when we set out principles, what we're looking for is those companies to consider each principle and consider whether they should comply with those principles or explain why they're not yet ready, so that we're seeing them on a journey of getting towards good corporate governance.
So we're in a particularly challenging economic environment right now. What do smaller companies have to gain by spending so much time and energy on issues of corporate governance? What is the real value for smaller companies?
The real value is creating a set of behaviours which ultimately drive long-term value for shareholders. If companies aren't looking at subjects such as sustainability, corporate social responsibility in the round, then they will not create value over the long term for shareholders, because the consumers, suppliers will mark them down, and they will find that they're not generating the profits and the returns that they otherwise would if they concentrate on these matters.
You review your code every few years. How do the key issues in corporate governance change over time?
Corporate governance has changed rapidly over the last 3 years since we last updated our code. We found that the UK Corporate Governance Code has taken into account many additional things, diversity, more concentration on remuneration and that sort of thing. So what we've tried to do is to take into account the changes that have taken place, but also perhaps to anticipate where corporate governance might be going. To give you an example, we're looking at putting in minimum disclosures that we would expect to see on a company's website. So not just relying on the annual report to demonstrate corporate governance behaviour and disclosure, but also websites where we think that standing data for corporate governance can now be included.
And what would you identify as the key corporate governance trends for the future?
Inevitably, there will be more and more concentration on executive pay, on linking executive pay with performance, and ensuring that the remuneration of the executives is aligned to make sure that they create long-term value for shareholders. Corporate governance has got to be about creating long-term value for shareholders, so it's all about how the strategy of the company is aligned and the performance of the executives is aligned to achieving that goal.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.